Great. All right. Wonderful. Good morning, everyone. My name is Danielle Coco, and I'm the marketing director at Sesta. Thanks for joining our webinar, Tools for Exporting Success, this morning. Our presenter, our featured guest, is Victoria Wasike with Golden Crest Global. Victoria and her team present Sesta's export readiness training twice a year. Victoria will talk more about that. We have one coming up in May. And they have been doing our export readiness training since 2021, I believe. So,
Yes.
yeah, we've been working together for a number of years, and Victoria is a wealth of knowledge on how to get U.S. agricultural goods outside of the U.S. How to export them outside of the US. So I will let her take it from here. Victoria, thanks for being with us.
Thanks so much, Danielle. So happy to be here. This is one of my favorite courses ever, Tools for Exporting Success. So happy to be here with everyone this morning. I want to go ahead and just say a little bit about myself. I'm Victoria Wasike, like Danielle said. She did a great job pronouncing my name. So that is wonderful. I guess she's used to me by now. So a little bit about myself. Basically, I worked in the Iowa International Trade Office, managing exports to Asia. Then moved over to be the manager of international business development for the state of Iowa, really focused on foreign direct investment for that job. I'm a lawyer by trade and training, and so I will practice law at now called Dentons Davis Brown in international law and litigation, manage various offices for the state of Iowa for export and FDI in Europe, Japan, China, Taiwan, and Mexico. Several governor-led trade missions. That was Governor Branstad back in the day. And then various different things I've done. I love teaching. I was a teacher, high school teacher in DC for 4 years. And then also have a master's in public policy. So, but from Florida and now live in North Carolina. So a little bit about myself, but just so happy to be here once again. So as Danielle mentioned, we have an export readiness training, what I call the full shebang, the whole 12 hours coming up very soon. So they are 3 sessions, 4 modules, about 4 hours each. There's, of course, some breaks in there. Sometimes we end early, sometimes we end late, but basically it's about 4 hours each. The one coming up in spring will be held in May. I believe you can already register. It's already online, but that will be May 15th, 22nd, and 29th. So it's 3 consecutive Wednesdays from 8:30 to 12:30. And so what I like to say is, this course gives you a great overview about what, right? Like what should you do, but the actual full shebang course that we offer in May will actually explain how, right? So how do we get the export certificate? How do we certify a product? How do we qualify a product under free trade agreement? All those how. How do we conduct market research? And so this is a very abbreviated 1.5 hour course, but of course, the one in May will be a lot more detailed. And then of course you get a wonderful SESTA ERT certificate showing that you participated. So just to show you a little bit about the training for that full shebang class while we wait for more people to come in. Module 1, which would be that first Wednesday, we talk about developing an export plan, classifying your product, conducting market research, but we actually go all over the internet. I show you actual free tools all over the internet. And then, export assistance and service providers that you can utilize. The next one is what I call export tools of the trade. We get into nitty gritty, which I love nitty gritty. Free trade agreements, how to qualify for them, how to find your foreign import requirements for most markets, how should you price products. We go into a deeper dive than, of course, today, finding buyers and partners, and then, of course, using Incoterms and pro forma invoices and commercial invoices. And finally, that last one is, once you ship your product off, navigating shipping logistics, foreign export regulations, of course, financing options and payment options and all that great stuff. So you can sign up, like I said, right now. When you sign up, you'll get a questionnaire if you do want to join our May full shebang course for, 3 weeks. And then the other great thing is you get session handouts. So it really does mirror the class. So if you next year think of a topic, and you need to go back, you'll have these session handouts. I think it's total of 10 pages total. And then you do have a little bit of homework, but it's great homework where you actually guide yourself through the training with your homework, and you kind of research your stuff. So you really have a good roadmap to start and follow once the training ends. So it's very interactive. And we also include seasoned exporters that will tell you their highs and lows, mostly highs, of course, and then industry experts. We do bring in a freight forwarder, and we also bring in an international banker, and you can pick their brains too. So very excited about that class. Once again, you get a certificate, and this is just some of the participants in the past giving their thoughts about the class. But I always like to plug that because I feel like this course is the precursor, because once again, I tell you what, but not how. I feel like you have enough information to be dangerous, which is dangerous. So I love, for people to once again go ahead and take that full course. You can sign up online. Okay, our goal is to create educated exporters that can use SESTA services. And so that's just a brief kind of precursor regarding the training that's going to happen in May. So make sure you are aware of it. All right, let's talk about what's happening today. So we have a wonderful 1.5 hour export readiness webinar. And so this will talk about 9 of those topics that we talk in the main course. So really classifying products for export, developing your export plan, and why you need to do market research. That's very important. Free trade agreements and why they are important. Foreign import requirements, pricing your products for export, finding partners and buyers. And we're going to wrap up this 1.5 hours with talking about pro forma invoices and Incoterms, shipping and logistics, and then export payments, financing, and insurance. Once again, this is a very high level course, so we're not going to do deep dives, but just going to touch on these topics so you just know a little bit more about them. So let's jump right into it, classifying your product for export. This is usually the first step, or a good first step. And so what does it mean to classify your product? Right? So you need to conduct market research. And in order to conduct that market research, you normally need some kind of classification code. Those can be for your product or products. If you have several products, like let's say you have tea and coffee or something like that, are decaffeinated and not decaffeinated, organic, not organic, you can have a variety of different classification codes, right? And then your industry, because sometimes you have tools that allows you to conduct market research based on your industry as a whole. Okay, so if you're, in a certain industry, let's say baked goods are, different kind of industries, and you kind of look at how your industry is doing as a whole, which also can help inform your decisions on where to export. So what are they? They're really numerical identification codes used nationally and internationally. They're harmonized, right? Internationally. And you can use them to pull market research, right? And so you can get your data. We're going to talk about how important data is. You never want to just go to countries willy-nilly, right? You want to definitely think about it, research the countries, get an export plan based on good market research. And these classification codes helps you pull that. Also, when you ship your goods overseas, you're going to, of course, have to include usually your Schedule B number, and that's how your import tariffs are determined, right? So for your product, because they have to have a code. And so you're going to include that when you ship your products overseas. So these codes, the main ones, are really the HS code. Okay, so that's 6 digits, and it really just describes your product. And then the 6 digits is actually the first 6 digits, which would be the HS code. If you stretch out to 10 digits, that's the Schedule B number. So the Schedule B number is 10 digits, and the first 6 digits of that is the HS code. For example, here I have, and you can see my little cursor here. This is one for coffee, okay? So, these 6 would be the HS code, and it just describes coffee quite detailed. So it's like roasted, not decaffeinated, all these numbers describe that. But when I tack on these last 4, that's a Schedule B, and it describes a little bit further. So 0010 will be organic. 0050 would be not organic. So when you're doing market research, if you can put a whole Schedule B number, you can be a little more detailed in the data that you pull based on your product. But a lot of times you're only able to put your HS code, okay? They're very simple to get. You usually just go on a Census Bureau website. If you take the full course, we'll go there with you. And you kind of plug in your description and it spits out, HS code / Schedule B number, usually the full Schedule B number, but the first 6 digits will be the HS code. Okay? And the NAICS codes, you might be familiar with that already, especially if you're a small business, but that kind of, summarizes your industry. So some tools online allow you to pull data about your industry, which we'll talk about why that's important when we're talking about doing market research, but that also can be helpful too. Okay, so normally you want to try to do those classifications and you'll kind of write them down so they're ready to use. So now let's go to topic 2. That's developing your export plan and conducting foreign market research. So why is an export plan important? Let's take a step back. So you want to have an export plan because you want to be prepared, right? And so you might get that email from Guatemala automatically saying, hey, I love your product, right? And so you can go ahead and fill those if you feel like that's good. And we're going to teach you, of course, how to do market research so you know if that's a good opportunity or not. If you're going to make money, lose money, what you need to do, right? But you also want to plan so that you can be, strategic and gain traction. So you're not just waiting for those random emails or going to a trade show and just waiting for someone to come. You want to be proactive too, right? So you can pick 3 countries that look good, do the market research, understanding what you might need to do to modify your product and all that great stuff. So export plan is really a good start so that you can actually be consistent and build traction in certain industries or in certain countries. So you can be proactive instead of just waiting. So when you conduct a export plan or create an export plan, it needs to be based off of foreign market research, right? And so we tie this and we talk extensively about this in the class in May. But generally, the type of things you want to start looking at so that to make sure that you're making good decisions would be first, you might want to do an industry analysis. Okay, that's like looking at your industry as a whole, right? How does it fare? Let's say you have baked goods, okay? So you want to kind of just see and do market research, go to certain sites, put in your, NAICS code, maybe if you're just looking at industry as a whole, or even like your Schedule B number or HS code, and really kind of do some research. But how are baked goods faring as a whole? Are they rising in Asia? Are they going down in Europe? Are they kind of rising in South America, in Africa? Just kind of understanding, right? So this helps you identify growing, emerging, and successful markets, right? So this is, like I said, very high level, but that's one analysis you would want to conduct so you make sure you have an export plan that is useful. The next thing you want to look at are your target markets, right? So you've seen, okay, let's say doing some research, we see baked goods are kind of going up in Europe, or let's say going up in Asia. And you want to go ahead and determine, well, what kind of markets should I be really looking at in those areas? Okay. And so that helps you narrow down. Our whole goal for you to have an export plan is for you to kind of narrow down so you can target your efforts initially so you can be successful. So that helps you to kind of determine what's been successful, fastest growing, and that kind of stuff. So you're kind of narrowing down. Maybe you have like maybe 20 markets you're looking at. Now you're kind of looking at maybe 10, or so, or 6 or so. Once you kind of start narrowing down based on initial market research, looking at your industry, looking at target markets, it's time for you to do a deeper dive because we're going to see every market is different. When we talk about foreign import requirements, every country can have its different foreign import requirements, right? So you want to make sure you do a deep dive to understand that market, the business environment, okay? How things operate there, the economy. Do you have people who can pay for your product? The culture. Do you have to change the packaging because yellow is offensive or white is offensive? Do you have words on your packaging that refers to pork in a place that you can't have pork? So all of those things, you just want to start kind of looking at specific markets and doing a deeper dive. This is going to help you to realize obstacles, right? And narrow down your options. Some countries you're like, this would be a good fit down the road, but I don't have the capacity to do everything they need me to do, right? So this is going to help you kind of narrow down a little bit. And then finally, you want to consider free trade agreements. They're very helpful. We'll talk about that in 1 second, a little more detail, but they will help you, reduce or eliminate tariffs so that your product can be more competitive. Okay, so the U.S. historically has a free trade agreement, and with a country, normally you'll have reduced tariffs or taxes on your product when it's imported into that country. So that will make you more competitive. So because your price of your product won't be as high as it would if you had that tariff, right? So, and one very key aspect when you're trying to determine which countries to look at is seeing if there might be a free trade agreement. Now, I want to stress there's only a few countries with a free trade agreement. So this does not preclude you from looking at other countries. When we have seasoned exporters come on here and talk to us, they're in 45 countries. They're in so many countries, and they manage all of them. And a lot of them are not with ones with free trade agreements. But this is just a helpful tool as you just determine where you might want to start. So a next important thing when you're thinking about an export plan and you're going along is really to assess your products, because I always say you don't always want all your babies out in the world at the same time. Sometimes you want to just pick one product. If you have one product, right, and you want to go ahead and pick maybe the region that one product will do best in, it might be good to kind of look at that instead of you have 4 products and maybe they all have different things that you need to do, change the taste, change the this and that. And so doing a product assessment within your company and making sure you understand your products and which ones will be good and not so good to maybe start out with is very important. So you can do a little chart like this, and in other class we do all kind of charts. We'll show you that you should want to do for your export plan. But this is just one of them for you to also assess your products, the strengths or weaknesses, why you think it will be successful in this export market. Maybe the size is smaller, and the buyers in that foreign country really need small sizes. Maybe the taste is more mild, and that region wants more mild taste. There's a variety of reasons, but you want to make sure that you can go ahead and determine which of your products might be best. And then you want to determine if a modification is needed. We'll talk about that a little bit more later. So if you kind of can put a little chart together, then you can kind of determine which of your products might have greater success or exporting potential in certain markets. And that's just a piece of your export plan and your foreign market research. Okay. We talked a little bit about free trade agreements a second ago, but I want to do a deeper dive into that. So free trade agreements, they are managed by the International Trade Administration. And once again, they can eliminate or remove a tariff and can make you more competitive, right? So it's really great if you can ship to a country with a free trade agreement. Each free trade agreement will have their own rules to qualify. This is very important that you know how to qualify your product under a free trade agreement. That course in May, we teach you exactly the steps, our concepts, but here your product will have to make sure that, you actually meet the rules of origin and you have the certification or proof to show that your product can qualify under free trade agreement. There are online tools that provide information. The ITA has a website that kind of talks about, the different rules, and you can pull tariff rates, but you really want to see if your product will benefit under a free trade agreement. Because just because there's a free trade agreement does not mean your product will have a 0 tariff, right? So you definitely want to check and see. Sometimes it's just reduced from 12% to 6%. Sometimes there's no reduction. Sometimes it'll be reduced, but it's over time. So it doesn't automatically mean that you'll have a 0, tariff if your product is exported or imported into that country and that you'll benefit from it. So you always want to do that analysis too. So these are the countries that the U.S. has free trade agreements with. So you can see them there: Australia, Bahrain, Chile, then there's the CAF, the DR, and Colombia, Israel, Jordan, South Korea, Morocco, Oman. So many. And then, of course, you have Canada, Mexico. That was signed and ratified in 2020. And then Japan has a limited ag-related one that most of your products will likely fall under. And that was put into agreement in 2020 also. So moving on. So this is the magic spot, right, that you're trying to determine. When you're doing that market research, You're trying to understand your industry, trying to understand the various countries and markets, trying to look at your product and what might be a good fit. Try to look and see if free trade agreements also make sense. And once you get all that information together, you're trying to find the largest, fastest growing, and simplest market to penetrate. And that's hard. It seems like, okay, come on, Victoria, that's impossible. But that's kind of your goal, right? Because you want to have the least amount of friction. And like I said, that doesn't mean you don't go to a country eventually. That just means sometimes you won't start there. So you want to go ahead and define which markets you want to pursue. Sometimes it's best to kind of test one market, then move on to secondary markets. We see that a lot. Sometimes people like to cluster and they say, well, I'll focus on this region because it might be more cost effective than saying, I'll go to Japan, then I'll go to Germany, then I'll go to Costa Rica. But I want to remind you, which we're going to talk about in a second, with foreign import requirements. Just because a country is clustered by each other does not mean they won't have different rules. Okay, so you can have a country like UAE and Saudi Arabia, and your product's trying to come in, right? And you say, oh, well, the language is similar, my labels will be similar or something like that. But one country allows some kind of additive, another country does not, right? So you still need to, even though you might kind of look at regional clusters, you still need to check the foreign import requirements, which we'll talk about in literally 2 minutes, to make sure that, it makes sense and your product can still get in. So foreign import requirements. Sorry. So this is a very important topic, right? Because every country / region will have import requirements that must be adhered to. The same way that the US would like to protect its citizens from things coming in to make sure no one gets sick, there's no pest inside any produce, to make sure that, they have the highest standards. Every country feels kind of like the same way, right? So they're going to have their own different import requirements. So most of the requirements that we talk about when we're exporting, they're not put on by the US government, right? It is the foreign government that is requiring these different things for you to modify your product, for you to change your labels, for you to now take out this additive, for you to put this recycling stamp on something, right? It's usually the foreign country. So you have to make sure that you really understand the foreign import requirements. So it's important to learn more about product and the requirements for your product, packaging, labeling, certifications, shipping requirements can include a whole host of things. And usually, we will do a deep dive into the FAIR's country report, which are reports put out, by the USDA, Foreign Agriculture Service, that really breaks down the foreign import requirements for various countries, and then the FAIR certificate report, so that you are aware of what certificates are required, right? But before you ever export into a country, you want to make sure that you've taken the time to understand and look at the foreign import requirements. Because if you don't, then it's a chance, of course, that your product will not get in. So understanding the foreign import requirements are necessary to understand extra costs and resources that are needed, and then also for you to adequately price your product too, right? So let's talk about it in a little more detail. So these are some of the foreign import requirements that you can expect to see, right? So you might see an ingredients and manufacturing process list. Now, Japan requires this, right? And so I like to say we have all kind of seasoned exporters come on when we do the full shebang class, which we'll have one in May. But one, came on and they did all this legwork for Japan, like, found people on the ground. We're looking at kind of manufacturing, modifying their product, all of that. And the last minute, they decided, I guess, to look at the rules. And they realized that Japan requires an ingredient list and a manufacturing process list. And then with that, they said no. They didn't want to do it, right? Now, if you look at that first, because it's very clear in the foreign import requirements or even the FAIR's report that this is required, then you wouldn't take all that time and effort, right? Exploring a country, making relationships, looking at your product in detail, maybe changing it because of step. And it was something with their lawyer, and they just decided, no, we don't want to do that. Okay. So that's why you always want to make sure not every country requires an ingredients and manufacturing process list, but Japan does, right? So you have to look up the different countries. Labeling. Now, normally standard, you're going to probably have to translate the label. Like that's a given, right? But of course, like the expiration date could be different, the sell by date. There's all these different kind of requirements, right? How nutrition labels have to be calculated. Definitely nowadays, that's kind of labeling and packaging. The types of, seals or, things you need to kind of look at for recycling are always changing. So you want to make sure you have up-to-date information, even with packaging of your crates, right? When you're trying to ship it. Now they usually require some kind of seal to say that your wood packaging or pellets have been heat treated, or even your package will not get in there. So you have to really make sure you take the time to look at this stuff. Food additives, like I just said, UAE allows the additive, and then right next door, close by, Saudi Arabia does not, right? And so then you need to make sure you understand, do you need to modify your product, strip it, or do something like that? Okay. So you could have sanitary requirements, that's usually with meat products. Phytosanitary requirements, that's usually with products that are unprocessed fruit and vegetables, very important. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a second when we talk about certifications. Export certifications, that's usually covered in the foreign import requirements. And then a whole host of other things like import procedures. So like Japan, not only do they require ingredients lists and manufacturer lists, they also include like some kind of declaration you have to include or something like that, right? So you want to make sure you know what form you need to use. Duties and taxes, or whether there's a free trade agreement that lessen those, that will be covered in the foreign import requirements. If you want to ship samples, that's usually covered, right? You're going to a trade show, you want to ship samples, what's allowed, what's not allowed, what do you need? So all of these things are very important aspects that you want to make sure you kind of understand before even attempting to ship your product somewhere. And people always ask me, oh, Victoria, how do I export? And really the question is export to where, right? So in the full shebang class, sorry to call it that, just clarifying, we teach you kind of like a process of how to fish, right? This is what you can use for every single kind of occasion so you kind of know what to do, right? But really, every country is different. Every country will have its own export requirements, which is why you definitely want to take the time to figure that out. Really briefly about export certifications, these are very important. We teach you how to get them in the other class, but sanitary certificates, if you are having any meat product, you normally need some kind of sanitary certificate. Phytosanitary certificate is, a certificate that you get for vegetables and fruit where they actually inspect it, right, and make sure there's no pest. And so that's a very big process. A lot of countries, let's say UAE requires like an FDA certificate or a state certificate, a free sale from your state ag department. So Japan does not require that, but UAE does, right? A lot of countries don't require that, but so you need to know if you're going to ship something to UAE, you need an FDA certificate right off the bat, right? For shelf stable. So that's, any good that's not shelf, that's actually shelf stable. And then a certificate of origin. Some countries like the UAE automatically requires a certificate of origin, automatically. So if you're going there, you need it, right? And then that is not to be confused with like a certification of origin that's kind of normally needed when you're dealing with a free trade agreement. So there's all these different kind of certifications, and there's many more. You shipping pet food, there's another one, right? You want to make sure you look and make sure you have all your certifications. Now, your buyer is usually your partner. Your buyer, this is not his first or her first rodeo getting products from the US. They will be a wealth of knowledge too. A lot of times they'll also be able to say, oh, yeah, make sure we need to have these 4 certificates or something like that. But it's always up to you to make sure you understand. And then that's why we want it as part of your market research. So you know what you're getting into, you know the time frames, you know what you have to do well before you get that buyer, right? So it's not a surprise to you. So we're moving on. We're kind of going on the tail end. Pricing products for export. This is very important because our goal is to make money, right? That's our goal. So we need to make sure that we understand pricing and have a strategy because different places might require different things, right? Different countries and markets. But we have a strategy so we can kind of make sure that we are taking into account all different costs. So usually for pricing products for export, you want to kind of examine exporting pricing from within your company, the actual cost you're laying out to understand a new market, to translate or different things, to have international marketing in that country, to hire people on the ground and pay commissions. All of that you want to think about and making sure you're taking into account, right? To make sure you're making money. And then you also want to look at your pricing externally, represented by the landed cost to the buyer. Because even though you weren't really responsible for some of these costs, when we say landed costs, which we'll talk about, because they're passed through costs that the importer pays and not you, like tariffs, usually the importer pays, unless you choose a different Incoterm, which we'll talk about. And let's say, shipping costs and that kind of stuff. You may not have to pay that, but rest assured that cost is usually going to be passed on to the consumer, right? And if those prices are high, your consumer, your price will be sitting on the shelf at a much higher rate or price than maybe competitors, and you may not be as competitive. So it's really important you have a holistic approach when you're talking about pricing. So just like the domestic market, if you price too high, your product will not sell. No good at all, right? And if you price too low, you may not be profitable. Really not good. So you want to find that sweet spot and you want to kind of have a strategy and kind of think about what you're looking at there. So a few key considerations, excuse me for a second, that you want to think about when pricing products for export. And these are just really high level. Once again, we talk about this in great detail in the other course, but your foreign market objective, all right? Sometimes this can inform your pricing strategy. Sometimes it's like, okay, I'm new to this market, so I might want to price myself more competitively. Sometimes you think, well, I have a surplus of product that, okay, I'm going to try to export so I can price it a little more competitively. But rest assured, of course, if you start really cheap, it's kind of hard to kind of raise it, right? So you kind of want to think this through. But what's your foreign market objective? Sometimes that can help, you determine what kind of pricing you can look at. One of the biggest thing is market demand. If people don't want your product, then you shouldn't bring it in there, right? Is there a demand for your product? Are there people who can pay? What's the per capita income? Do you have an expat community that might can pay a higher premium? That's normally what you're going to find with American product because they're higher quality a lot of times, right? But you got to have some market demand, and you must make sure that you have someone who's interested in your product. Competition. Now it's much easier to kind of see what your competitor is priced at. You can actually go on to international grocery stores and kind of look at different prices in different countries. But understanding your competition is very important because when you export, your competitors are not only your US companies to the right or the left, right? They're actually competitors normally, unless you have some very specialized product, sitting right there in that home country. And they won't have to pay a tariff, sometimes 50%, 40%, right? And they will be more competitive than you. So you want to make sure you understand, what your competition is. Not only your US competition who might be trying to get into that country, not only the domestic competition sometimes, but then you also want to look at, other companies from other countries that might be trying to get their product in. Sometimes they may have a free trade agreement that makes them more competitive and you don't. So it's a very kind of thing you want to just take some time and just make sure you consider. So you just have a good pricing strategy. And finally, as you can imagine, cost. Cost is a big deal because you need to recoup your costs, right? And so that's one thing that you want to consider. So once you kind of look at these different strategies and think about them and think them through, sometimes, of course, your export prices will be different from domestic prices, but at least you want to kind of have these conversations and think about these things. So when we talk about direct costs, right, or cost to you, operating costs are directly tied to shipping your product. very important that you think of a few things, right? So one could be like fees for market research and credit checks. Um, we give you tools for a lot of free market research, but if you pay for it, then you want to make sure that you kind of like, account for that cost. Business travel and expenses, promotional materials. If you're going to hire a TikToker and, in Mexico or something like that, and, you want to make sure that you account for that translation cost, commissions and any kind of training costs or whoever for your foreign reps. And this is another big one. Some companies we deal with, they say they go ahead and they file, trademark or our copyright, whatever, trademark in different countries automatically. They have a lawyer file it automatically wherever they're going in. Some other companies like, oh, no, we don't do that every time, So, but if you do, you want to think about those fees, taxes, import related or export related insurance, product modification and special packaging, because that can definitely be an issue. And then you also want to think about those pass-through costs, right? And we'll talk about that in a second. Even though you don't pay for them, of course, there might be, of course, it still affect the final cost of your product. So when we talk about pass-through, a lot of them are landed costs. These are additional costs are typically borne by the importer, so you typically won't pay, right? So you're like, oh, why should I care about those? Because those can add greatly to the final price of your product sitting on that shelf. And sometimes it's double. And sometimes people have to just kind of, when they do the calculations, once again, they say, well, just not now. This market's not ready for us. We don't have people who can pay $6 for ketchup here. We just don't. Once you look at the landed costs and all that kind of stuff and everything, this just may not be the market for us, So you want to take into account the landed costs. These include tariffs, custom fees, transaction costs like shipping, value-added taxes. A lot of those will be paid by the importer, but it can definitely have an effect. Here's a little breakdown to just see how that might actually work. So let's say you have a product and it is 500 units at $50 at your facility, right? So before it leaves, the price for that unit or 500 units is $25,000. Okay? So, but let's say once you add freight, 900, you add customs, which here is 2%, 500. You add insurance, 500. You add a tariff or a tax, 10%, which is actually very reasonable. A lot of times they can be 40, they can be really high. So that adds on another 2,500. Now the total landed cost for that same 500 units jumps for 25,000 all the way down to 29,400. Of course, that's not even taken into account if you hired someone on the ground, you have to pay a commission, you did it, you filed, things legally and all that kind of stuff, right? So naturally now what costs $50 per unit, just when you take into account these landed costs, even if you didn't really pay for them, the importer pays, it raises the cost per unit to $58, right? So you want to really kind of take all of this into account. So we're going to switch on now to finding partners and buyers. So finding partners and buyers is very important because you want to make sure you understand who's out there, right? And who can help you. So finding partners is very important because a lot of times, almost every time when you go into a foreign country, you usually kind of don't do it alone. You are kind of sometimes finding people on the ground who can help you, who can sell your product, distributors and other things like that. But there's two kind of options when you're talking about finding partners or you're selling abroad. One is indirect selling. And this can be kind of common if it's a new market, you're not really used to it, and you want to maybe use an intermediary instead. So you're not dealing directly with the buyer, but you're bringing someone in and you're using like an intermediary, like an export management company. This is common, right? If there's a market that you're like, okay, I can do Mexico, but South Korea, and so you want to go and hire export management company. Some people will utilize them and they act as their de facto export kind of office, right? For that market, they kind of handle everything. But because you're a couple steps removed, you're not really into, you don't really know the market well, you're trusting someone else. Sometimes it's slower to try to, change with market demands. So it's not always favorable, but that is an option. And it's favorable on one hand because you don't really have to actually kind of do the exporting yourself. So it is common. Direct selling is also, of course, very common. And that's when you kind of what you're doing here, learning how to sell direct all the way through. So this time you're dealing with a buyer. Okay. There are different advantages for this. You have more control of your product, of how it's promoted, higher profits because you're cutting out that cost of an export management company, lower prices, you can be more competitive, and you have close contact with the customers and market. A lot of times, sometimes, a company will start indirectly with an export management company for a couple of years, and then they'll start maybe shifting over and maybe try to do it themselves. So the disadvantage, of course, is that it's going to take more time, personnel, resources, longer time for product awareness, because a lot of times an export management company, you kind of have like a well-oiled machine on the ground. And now you're going to have to, of course, raise awareness yourself, and you might have less knowledge and experience of that foreign market. So just different types, and and neither one is right. And sometimes there's a combined approach. You take over this market and you might have some help in another market, but just want to kind of cover that. Now, for each of your market, though, regardless, you're going to have a channel of distribution, right? That's needed. Okay. And so you always usually will have helpers, right? And these can include sales rep, where people just kind of go out and sell your product. This is very important. And so this can really, of course, greatly raise awareness of your product. And these people usually don't have the power to bind your company, right? So they can go out, sell, and they can kind of bring in sales for you. An agent, on the other hand, which is why when you're dealing abroad, you want to be very clear about who you're hiring and what capacity, and making sure you understand, right? Because an agent has the power to bind you. So if the agent is representing yourself as an agent, your contract is an agent, then if he says, yeah, we can have that to you in 2 weeks, and he binds you, and he turns around to you and you're like, 2 weeks? No, that's going to take 2 months, right? Well, what do you do? So you want to make sure you kind of understand, and this should be spelled out very clearly in some kind of agreement, right? Of course. Distributors, usually they take title to your product, and usually they take quite a bit of it, and they can kind of go ahead and keep the relationships going with the retailers and source to retailers. Then a lot of times, nowadays, things are kind of becoming vertically integrated. You can go to retailers, they have their own distributors. And then now with the internet, you can go straight to end users now. But the issue is, this is very high level once again, but you want to do proper due diligence. We have so many people come to us and just say, I have been paying this guy in India for 5 years, but I have no exit clause in my contract. I have no way to get out, not very happy with the services, but I still pay, right? So you definitely want to make sure that you have a contract with anyone you're dealing business with abroad that is very clear. You definitely want some kind of performance period, maybe first 6 months or something, something very spelled out, and then definitely how the contract will end. Okay. But all these key things, the same thing what you would do in the US, make sure you have a contract. You want to make sure that you do that internationally too. We hear all kinds of stories. And the main thing is to protect yourself before you enter into these agreements. Sometimes with different countries, people will hear about, the EU, they think they have just a sales agent, then all of a sudden the agent becomes their employee, right? And now they have to do all of this stuff as an employee. And they're like, I didn't expect him to be your employee. I thought I was just hiring him, just to be a rep. So you want to make sure you understand very clearly what you're getting into. Other things you want to kind of consider when you're hiring someone on the ground. Remember, so these are your partners that usually will definitely help you, but you want to consider the size of their sales force, right? So if it's a 2-man office and you're fine with it, great. But if it's a 2-man office, you're expecting 20, the sales records. We have some companies that are export experts, seasoned exporters that come on, and they say they make sure that whoever they're dealing with, that they can sign an NDA with them. So that way, even in the initial stage when they're learning more about the company, that company can feel very free to give information about their sales records, so they can, so you can really see what they've done, and that you can be free to kind of talk more freely about your product. So sometimes they say no. As soon as they kind of go down this road and they find someone that they might entertain, they kind of go ahead and do an NDA. Okay. So it's so many ways. That's why I love bringing the seasoned exporters on, because they all have all different kind of ways they do things. But you want to make sure you can access or learn about their sales records to make sure that they have been successful for someone else and you're not their guinea pig, right? They're just trying on you. Territorial analysis. This is so important because you want to know, where is this person representing you? Okay. Is it like, let's say the US is so huge. Are they only representing you in the Southeast? Are they claiming they can represent you in the whole US? Because LA is way different from Alabama, right? What are they saying? Where are they representing you? And it might be in the same country. Like, oh, they're going to represent in all of Germany. Different languages, different customs. So you want to make sure that you have a very clear understanding of where they're helping you. Product mix. A lot of times you aren't going to be their only product, right? So sometimes you want to make sure that it's a good product mix, that maybe not directly competing with you, or if their other clients are competing with you, how do they balance that out? And you definitely don't want them representing something that might be detrimental to you, right? So you want to make sure you understand, like, what else are you doing? Facilities and equipment, especially if they're going to take title and kind of like house some of your products. We've heard it before where, of course, if you need cold storage, they better have cold storage. Or sometimes, we heard in one facility, they didn't have air condition and it was a very hot day or something like that, and all the bottles exploded or something like that, or got too cold. Whatever it is, you want to make sure that whoever's going to be handling your product on the ground, they have the proper facilities and equipment. Marketing policies, very important. This also goes to promotional thrust in the bottom, but you want to see and talk to them and not guess. A lot of times you want first right of refusal too. But if they are going to be doing any marketing for you, they are going to be having influencers hired, they are going to be doing something on the radio, whatever, that you can see it, view it, approve it, especially first off. We have some people say, well, sometimes just the color is off, or they got my logo wrong, or, they just didn't even spell it right, things like that. But you want to make sure you understand, do you have first right of refusal if they're creating something for you? Can you see it? What's that process? And finally, customer profiles. Once again, you shouldn't be their only one, right? So they should be able to tell you who else they've helped. So this is such an abbreviated version, but once again, these things are so important. I just want to, really stress that partners on the ground can be great, but you want to do your due diligence before you connect with them. Finding buyers, well, the best way will usually be kind of like SESTA has some great services it can provide, right? So inbound buyers programs, trade missions, trade shows, of course, your own website or other websites, networking, trade industry events. There's so many ways for you to attract buyers, of course, on top of you hiring sales reps, right, in the country or something like that. So once again, utilizing all the wonderful services from SESTA, and of course, your State Department of Ag also have wonderful opportunities too. They may have also inbound buyers programs and the like, and trade shows that they can help you with. But there's so many different kind of services that are out there that can help you connect with buyers. Okay. So let's go ahead and move on. Looking at my time here. I can do it. I know I can. So pro forma invoices and Incoterms. So you're happy, you got your reps, they're doing great, you like them, right? And then you got a buyer, right? And, because you're happy there. Now it's time to go ahead and start contracting and doing stuff like that, right? Like getting the invoices together and that kind of stuff. So one thing you want to consider are pro forma invoices. So normally in international trade or exporting, you'll use a pro forma invoice, which is a quotation prepared in the format of an invoice, but it's the one that's preferred in the exporting business. You want to use it in any international quotation, even if not asked. So let's say your buyer doesn't ask for a pro forma invoice. You still want to utilize a pro forma invoice because it has a few more things in it than a normal invoice. That helps to avoid confusion, and costly mistakes. Normally, the pro forma invoice will be the basis for the commercial invoice, which is the final bill of sale. I have so many people like, Victoria, I don't understand. The buyer won't accept this as my invoice. No, the pro forma invoice is not the commercial invoice. It's not the final bill of sale. The commercial invoice that kind of goes with the product and all that kind of stuff, that is the commercial invoice. This is the step before, okay? So this includes more details than what you're used to writing in quotations, but the extra detail can save time and prevent errors later on. And there's two things you want to consider before you start writing out that quotation, right? First off, your pricing strategy, because we talked about a whole bunch of different things about your pricing, right? And you want to make sure for that pricing strategy, you have thought those things through so you won't lose money. You just don't want to be like, well, I'll just use my domestic pricing. What the heck? No, right? So you want to think through how you're pricing this thing so you won't lose money and so, but you still be competitive. All those things we talked about. And then the second thing you want to put that's usually included in your pro forma invoice is the level of risk for the shipment. And you do that by putting in the Incoterm. Okay, now what is an Incoterm? So Incoterms are important. And once again, that's the level of risk for the shipment. So let's talk about an Incoterm in greater detail, or also called terms of sale. So the Incoterm spells out which parties are responsible to pay and assume risk at each stage of the international transit of goods, right? Because when you ship your product, and maybe not Canada and Mexico, but let's say you're shipping your product to South Korea, all right? There are a lot of stages, right? So there's the stages at your facility, and then there's a stage of driving it from your facility to a port. And there's a stage of it sitting at the port. And there's a stage of it getting on the boat. Then there's a stage of it crossing the ocean. There's a stage of it getting off the boat in the other country, and then transit to the foreign buyer, and then finally at his place or her place, right? So all of those stages can have disaster, not really, but yes, like we saw in Baltimore with the whole, ship went down. At some point in stage, of that stage, that cargo didn't make it because something happened to it, right? An Incoterm spells out who's responsible to pay and assume risk at each stage, right? So sometimes the buyer is responsible up to this stage. Sometimes the seller is responsible. Sometimes the buyer has to get insurance, the seller. But instead of working all this out, okay, let's sit down and say, okay, well, you're going to be responsible for insurance. You're going to be responsible for at my place. You're going to be responsible. Incoterm just does it really fast. Okay, so it will specify who's responsible for paying and for managing the shipment, insurance, documentation, customs clearance, logistical activities, all of that. Once again, this is very high level. So forgive me, I just feel like, gosh, there's so much more we could be talking about. But one example is Ex Works. This is when the buyer is responsible, that's your buyer, not you, to pay for picking the product up at your facility, insurance, arranging customs clearance, duties, and taxes. They have to do all of that. All you do to say to the buyer, you say, come at my facility at 12 p.m. on Friday. I'll make this package or this box available to you. That's it. And the buyer is responsible for everything else. Now, some exporters say, all I do is Ex Works. All I do is Ex Works, right? I make sure that the buyer is responsible for everything. Might be okay. Some buyers aren't having it though, right? So, and then also when you do that, there's other ramifications, which we won't get into it so much in this class, but that means someone else is filling out your export compliance information. And then also you better get payment up front because your product is basically gone, right? So there's payment options or considerations you have to think about if you do Ex Works. And then there's also compliance options you want to think about, right? So it's all kind of like intertwined. The exact opposite of that is DDP. That's where the seller is responsible, you, for delivering the goods duty paid to the buyer's place of business. Now, duty paid, normally you don't pay the duty. Remember we talked about taxes? Normally the importer pays, but if you pick DDP, now you're responsible to pay that tariff or tax. Okay, so you want to make sure you know what you're doing before you just kind of put it inside, the pro forma invoice. So you want to make sure you understand before you use them in quotation, pro forma invoice. So here's a handy dandy chart. We're not going to go deep into it today because, of course, this is a high level course. But as you can see, X works. The buyer is responsible for all of these steps, right? From loading the truck from your facility, clearing export, customs, getting it to the port of export, well, let's say the port of Wilmington, unloading it at the port of export, loading it, right, on the boat, crossing the ocean, getting it off at the port, all these steps, including insurance and taxes, all of it. As you can see, for taxes, normally the buyer is responsible, not you, for all these other steps, which in other course we go over all of these popular ones. So we're just not doing it now, right? FOB, CIF, all that kind of stuff. But as the stark example, if you choose DDP, now you are responsible for everything, even taxes, which normally you would not be. So you want to make sure before you use these Incoterms that you understand what you're doing, okay? So once you go ahead and you agree upon all the terms and all that great stuff, you're ready to export. Now it's time for your commercial invoice. Once again, that is the actual final kind of like, official document. So it's a legal document between the seller and buyer describing goods and prices, okay? So, the goods and the price. Key documents for the customs clearance and determine customs duties. So when it's at the port, this is basically how they determine and you clear customs, usually by using the commercial invoice. It typically includes many of the same details for a pro forma invoice. And so it's very important that you kind of look at the commercial invoice. Now, there are different types of commercial invoices. Sometimes if you're actually going to a foreign country, they might have their own special rules, right? So some commercial invoices, let's say CARICOM, they have they have their own special commercial invoice that you need 5 copies of. If you don't have 5 copies of their commercial invoice, you need to have one of your own that has the same 9, categories or something on your invoice. So that's why you definitely want to still something simple as, oh, my commercial invoice. Check the foreign import requirements. Some countries in the Middle East and Africa require a consularized commercial invoice, where the freight forwarder will take your commercial invoice and send it to the U.S. Embassy, or no, not U.S. Embassy, the embassy of the foreign country in the U.S. or consulate, and they have to consularize it. That can take 2 weeks, right? So you want to make sure, like I said, this is so high level, but once again, just check is what you want to do. Okay? So shipping and logistics. Next to the last topic, so we're almost there. So when you are considering shipping your product abroad, you want to make sure you think about packaging, labeling, insurance requirements, and regulations. I want to stress this. Nowadays, like I said before, and your freight forwarder can help you with this. Your freight forwarder is your friend. Like I said, for that long class, we bring your freight forwarder in so you can pick her brain. But it's getting so complicated nowadays with the type of packaging, the type of pellets. They have to be heat treated. All this different thing is getting more and more complex, right? So you want to make sure that you understand what's going to be required so that you pack your product appropriately. And we go into great detail. But of course, if you want to have it purely labeled, sometimes when you have different certificates, like a sanitary certificate, you have to have like an export marking on the outside of your packaging. If you have meat, there's all these different things. But the point is you want to make sure that you check the packaging and labeling rules. And then there's also common sense things too, right? Fragile, this side up, all kind of stuff. So insurance requirements, of course, you can get cargo insurance, and then various regulations. This will ensure that your product is packaged correctly so that it arrives in good condition, labeled correctly to ensure that goods are handled properly, arrive on time, and can be omitted, because sometimes if it's not right, they will not let you put that product in there, and then in the right place. You want it to be documented correctly to meet U.S. and foreign government regulations. And then you want, of course, to insure the product. So very quickly, the role of your freight forwarder, I always say, once again, probably for the 5th time, freight forwarder is your friend. The freight forwarder is your friend. You need a good freight forwarder who can really help you, right? So this is an agent that ships cargo to an overseas destination. They're usually familiar with the foreign country's import rules and regulations, but I'll tell you, for ag, there's a lot more, right, than you just shipping widgets or something. So you want to make sure that, of course, you know the foreign import rules too. But they usually are familiar with the general rules for foreign countries and then government regulations regarding shipping and necessary documents. You want to make sure that you have a freight forwarder that's licensed by IATA or the Federal Maritime Commission. If not, you're just paying a broker and they're using freight forwarder. So that's something that you want to just keep in mind. So they can really help you. Let's say you need pricing for your pro forma invoice. They can help you, of course, with like freight costs, port charges, the cost of, special documentation, insurance costs. Then they also can help with recommending and assisting with packaging. So let's say it's a new country and you're not sure about their packaging rules. They can sometimes help you with the packaging, right? They can actually do it, and maybe you have them do it first and then you can take it from there. Reviewing letters of credit. I can't get into it now. But having them review letters of credit, if you have one, is very important because you don't want to have some kind of time frame that you can't meet. You don't want to put the wrong port in there, or you don't want to have anything wrong with your letter of credit, right? So your freight forwarder will help to review that. Commercial invoices, they have to get things consularized. They can do all that. They can reserve a space on board an ocean vessel. Once again, like before, during COVID, you're talking about 4 weeks time, longer months. Now you're talking very quick, right? But you still want them to help you with that. Arrange with customs brokers, to ensure with compliance regulations on that and all that great stuff. There's so many things. Another thing is very important. If you want a special kind of note for your freight forwarder to forward this to a bank for a letter of credit or something else, or for payment, then you can kind of tell them to do that and they can forward documents where they need to go. So very quickly, we're talking about modes of transportation. There's only 3 that we know of right now: land, air, and sea. So usually you want to consider which one might be best. If you promise your buyer that you can get it there, I don't know, in a crazy time frame, air might be your only option, right? But it might be more expensive, but it might be cheaper because, the way they calculate sea volume and price is different how they calculate air, and all of that good stuff kind of counts: time frame, wage, cost. And then sometimes, with air, you might not need the additional transportation to a seaport, right? Because the airport is right there. So it might be cheaper. But these are things that a freight forwarder will help you with, right? But your whole point is to, they wanted to ask, what's your priority? Is it cost? Is it time frame? And they can kind of help you plot a course there. Very quickly, when we talk about export shipping / documentation, we talked about this a little bit a second ago, but these include different documents like the commercial invoice or consular invoices, if you have to get it consularized. Those are going to be included in your shipment. Any kind of pre-shipment inspections like a phytosanitary certificate, then you want to make sure you have those pre-shipment inspections. Various certificate of free sale, FDA certificate, sanitary certificate of origin, any kind of certificate you're supposed to have, right? You want to make sure you have them. Export controls, they can help with that. And then, of course, you have documents used in the movement of goods. So finally, we're getting to one thing when we talk about export controls. This is really the only thing required by the U.S. government. All the other requirements, like I talked about a second ago, are requirements by foreign governments, not the U.S. government, right? The only thing that the U.S. government really, really, really requires is this electronic export information, or EEI. Okay, so that's pretty much the export control. So it must be filed electronically by your business, the freight forwarder, or a third party. You can use AES Direct to file electronically. Normally, your freight forwarder can do this for you. 9 times out of 10, if you're dealing with ag products, you will not need an actual export license. Okay, because that's reserved for military use products, but that could be very broad. Like ball bearings are considered like military use products, right? Because anything that could be used for military is sometimes included. Anyway, but that's beyond the scope of ag. And, normally if you're ag product, you're just designated EAR 99, which means you do not need a license, and you'll just kind of put in your shipping documents that you're EAR 99. Now, if you're shipping to an embargo country, I always want to say company there, embargo country, then you would need an export license. right? And so you want your freight forwarder will be able to help you with that. But of course, so no matter what your product is, even if it's non-military use or military use, if it's going to an embargoed country, then you need to have an export license. So if you're a freight forwarder and customs broker, they're familiar with these documents, but ultimately it's your responsibility to make sure you understand and the accuracy of the documents are correct. Okay, so those are just a few things I want to share very briefly. Finally, these are just some items that are included in when you ship your product. So you have the export packing list. Everyone's seen the packing list. It just tells you the quantity, also includes things like, how much things may weigh and that kind of stuff. The shipper's instructions, like this is literally like the Bible for the shipment. Okay, so this is very important. Normally they have kind of like a power of attorney kind of clause in there that allows your freight forwarder to go ahead and do that EEI, or AES direct for export controls purposes. And then also, if there are any special instructions, if you say, I have a letter of credit, so this document needs to be sent to a bank, upon the shipment, or this needs to happen, or it needs to be shipped to this place, not the buyer's place of business, but some port because there's some kind of special tariff thing with the port or something like that. Anything like that, it needs to be captured in the shipper's instructions, because if it's not, they're gonna act like they never knew you. Okay, when you come back and say, why didn't you? Okay, so you want to make sure that you really, really kind of look at that and you fill that out very carefully with your freight forwarder. The bill of lading is pretty much just a contract, of course, for them shipping your goods, and if it's a plane, it's called an airway bill. There are a lot more complications dealing with these products and the interplay of these products, and then also the payment term or method that you use. So we can't cover that now, but like if you use certain types of payments, you want to use certain types of types of bill of lading, that kind of stuff. That's covered more in the other classes. A lot of kind of interplay between, that. But for the most part, these are just some of the standard documents. So now we come to payments, our last topic, and I think I did pretty good on time. So export payments, financing, insurance. So the types of payment options. So there are a few of them you can use, right? And this is very important because the worst thing is to do all of this effort and not get paid. Like that is the worst, right? So there are a variety of payment tools depending on the level of trust and credit worthiness of the buyer. So if you trust this buyer, right, and they're credit worthy, then you might can use one option. If you don't trust this buyer and he's not credit worthy, he or her, you want to use another option. Or you say, I don't trust that buyer, but I trust his bank. Then you might want to use another option, right? So all of that comes into play when you're thinking about what type of export payment. And sometimes beggars can't be choosers. Like sometimes you might say you want this, but if the buyer says, no, I want that, then, you might have to kind of adjust your expectations, or you might have to get, a credit insurance or something like that. But we'll talk about that very briefly, high level right now. So order from the most secure for the exporter and least secure for the exporter. This is kind of where it is. So exporter risk. At the top, which gives you the least amount of risk as an exporter, but the importer, the greatest amount of risk is cash in advance. That's what we all love, right? Cash in advance. You get a wire transfer, credit card, not so much check, because check can really, not really be. That's almost like you don't know what's going to happen with that check. But cash in advance, that is the greatest, right? But sometimes you might want to say, well, no, I want cash in advance, right? But the importer might push back because the importer may not know you. So he's like, well, I'm going to give you money and I don't got my product. No. So that's why there's always kind of like a song and dance going. But cash in advance is a holy grail. That's what everybody wants, right? Letters of credit, that's the second level that provides you with the least amount of risk. And then the importer, some risk. So letters of credit, it's when the importer's bank decides to go ahead and pay. So not your bank, the importer's bank will pay upon the receipt of shipping documents or something like that. So it gives the importer or buyer a little bit more faith, because in order to pay, they have to see the shipping documents. So they at least know that you didn't run off with their money. Something was shipped, right? And so, and then of course you have the backing of that bank. So if that buyer doesn't pay, the bank will pay. So that's why letters of credit, they're a little more costly, of course, than the other options. But you have, if you trust that bank, not so much the buyer, then it's a good option. Okay. If you don't trust that buyer's bank either, you can have the US bank confirm that. Usually we have, like I said, international banker that will cover these all in more detail. There's a lot of nuances, but that's basically what a letter of credit is. You got to be careful. You don't want any discrepancies, of course, with a letter of credit, because one small thing they can say, oh no, we're going to delay payment because this isn't right on that letter of credit. You put something here and it's supposed to be that. So you always want to make sure your international banker and your freight forwarder looks at letters of credit. The next one is documentary collection. It provides you with a little less, surety, right? It's a little less secure for you because it just moves the documents around and the payment around. But there's no guarantee from a bank to pay if that buyer, defaults. Okay. So really, basically, the seller's bank will go ahead and send over a payment once it's received shipping documents. So of course, the importer's happy because it's not like cash in advance. It has some kind of document that you actually ship the product, right? So he's like, okay, right? And then once they receive that document saying that something was shipped, then the seller's bank will go ahead and send over the payment. Okay? But there's no guarantee from their bank to pay. No one is sticking out their neck out saying if this buyer defaults. Of course, so this is much cheaper. And talking to our international banker, he does thousands more of these, of course, than the letter of credit. But at least you have banks involved. And the importer has a little bit more surety than like cash in advance because at least he can see that something was sent. Open account. Okay. So this is where, of course, the products are shipped before payment is due. Okay. So you really have a lot of faith. So this is the riskiest for you. And then pretty much not risky at all. So, we had one exporter saying, oh, I only do open account. I only do open account. I'm just like, okay, that's so risky. How? And so it turns out her biggest buyer was it was like the Whole Foods of Brazil or something like that, some huge company. Like, oh, okay, now I see why you only do open account. But, usually this is a song and a dance. Sometimes, the buyer really wants a letter of credit or something like that, and you want this, and you need to go ahead and negotiate sometimes this. So open account, if you are going to use that, you can consider getting credit insurance from the Exim Bank, or sorry, export, insurance from the Exim Bank. And that can offer some protection. Well, this is very high level, but at least you kind of know the gist of the different options. And the main thing you want to think about once again is the trustworthiness of your buyer and his bank. So if you're doing a letter of credit. So foreign exchange issues, this can be a real stickler when you're dealing with, of course, international exporting and payments. So sometimes you have different options for payment currency. You have your own currency, you have the buyer's currency, you can pick another currency. It's really best that you use US dollar. But if you are like, let's say shipping to Europe and they're like, well, I want to use the euro. I have all these other countries that I can buy from that's in the euro with me with the same currency. Why am I going to deal with the dollar? In that case, you might have to just make a concession, right? So, but just understand that there's different payment currencies. There's some risk, of course, with foreign exchange rates. By the time the payment is made, sometimes that currency has gone down. Sometimes things can go down so drastically that buyer, even in good faith, can't pay anymore because his value currency have been so devalued. So these are always risks, which is why you want to do hopefully in the US dollar, you use a US dollar. But if not, you want to make sure you understand these risks. You can use tools to minimize your international banker can use a forward contract and other things to help you with that, but you want to consider these things. If there's payment problems, first off, you try to avoid them, right? By choosing the right payment option, that kind of stuff. But in the event of non-payment, if there's no bad faith, let's say this person's currency was devalued and it's just no fault of its own, the war broke out, or I don't know, it can be anything, right? Then you want to just try to work with the person in good faith, right? If there's not good faith, or there's just no moving forward, then sometimes there's mediation, arbitration options. We won't get into right now, but definitely the main thing is making sure you pick smart kind of payment options in the beginning. So finally, if you're looking at financing your exports, the Exim Bank, they offer financing and credit insurance. Credit insurance meaning if you're going to use an open account, that can kind of help with some of the risk. SBA has working capital loan programs and other programs. Some of them, they have different kind of rules. Some of them are for larger companies, smaller companies. You can kind of look on their websites. We won't go into great detail here. And the USDA has a very limited program. It's very limited per like different countries and different things that they will actually do credit guarantees for, but that is an option if you qualify or fall under, this program. So those are just some options if you're looking to fund your exports. That's it. To go back to the export readiness training in May, once again, the spring one will be held May 15th, 22nd, and 29th. You can register today if you're interested. And then you'll get a great SESTA ERT certificate. And that's basically all I have. So yeah, and a couple minutes to spare. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them. And if not, I'll kind of turn it back over to Danielle.
Right. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Victoria. That was wonderful and thorough. So much information. As Victoria mentioned, it's today she really is touching on all the different topics. But in the full export readiness training, there's, really the full exploration of those topics and how to actually like internalize them for your company and implement them. So it really is a great opportunity. And I know you're all muted. That's just to, keep the background noise down. But if you have questions, please type them into the chat or the Q&A, and we can address those now, or you can reach out to us after the webinar. I see one. How can we get a copy of the slides? So we'll be posting the webinar recording to the past webinars portion of our website, and I will send everybody the link to that once it's done later today or tomorrow morning.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Any other questions? Victoria, you may have just inundated us all with so much information. Everybody's
like,
just
no more, please.
thing.
No, it's no work. Well, I just want to say thank you for everyone who attended. I know this is so much information. I feel like it's just like I always tell Danielle, it's just enough to be dangerous, I feel like. But I hope you learned something, and we look forward to seeing you guys hopefully at one of the future full courses. But thank you for your time.
Okay, wait, somebody. Oh, so much great info. What's a good way to access if you are export ready as a company? Does Victoria do consulting?
Funny saying that. Danielle might.
What's a good way to assess if you're export ready as a company? Okay, yes. So, Victoria, how would you say a company could assess if they're to determine if they're export ready?
Well, I think because we give a wonderful questionnaire, it is in conjunction with the full shebang training. However, it really does look at, assessing whether you're ready. It really does. I feel like that questionnaire is really great. So I think starting with that is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And then of course taking the training, it doesn't hurt for you to know more what you don't know. I feel like that's a good step too. And then, hopefully we can add more, types of trainings in the future or kind of programs. But for right now, I think with SESTA, those are the main things.
Okay. Yep. Great. I'll send out the questionnaire as well when I send the follow-up email. And
that would
yes,
be great. Yeah.
Yeah,
Because I feel
Victoria,
like
that is, yeah, it's a good way to assess.
Mm-hmm.
And let's see, I think somebody had a raised hand. Oh, I just raised mine. Sorry, I thought I saw. Oh, Sheila. Okay, I'm going to allow Sheila to talk. Hang on.
Okay.
All right. Hey, Sheila.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. If a company reaches out to us, because I guess I'm on the MyConnex and I did the little web page through SESTA, so I guess some companies will reach out to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Internationally. So that kind of makes me nervous because, like, all this information we're getting, I'm not really certain whether or not I'm prepared to go a step further with other companies. So, when we get these messages, is there someone that we should be consulting with or that we can consult with to talk about maybe the options that these companies are presenting to us so that we don't kind of get over our head? Does that
That's a
make
great
sense?
question. Yeah. So Sheila, what I would suggest is, yes, if a company reaches out to you, so Sheila has created her Connects 365 page on our website, which is great.
Mhm.
And foreign buyers can log into that account or to that part of our website and see all of the companies that have Connects pages, and they'll reach out if they want to, start a conversation with you. And so I think Sheila's question is, if somebody reaches out and is interested in importing your products and you're maybe not sure that you're export ready, what to do? It's a really good question. I would loop in Asta. I mean, we will see the emails that are sent. To you if they're sent through the system, if there is one sent. So, but if they're reaching out to you and you're not sure, you can always loop us in and we can help you navigate that and make sure, yeah, that you're ready.
Okay, that's good to know because I've received a few messages and
Oh, great.
some may be from like international distributors, someone
Yeah.
like that's a distributor, like a middle person. I've
Hmm.
received like a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
And then it was some like companies from like the Asian continent. And so I'm not always certain if they're coming, like, I guess you just answered my question. If they come through your site, you guys are going to see the email, but sometimes they'll just go to my site and they'll email me through my website.
Okay. And so those, we don't necessarily know who those people are if they're just going straight to you. If they're coming through the Connects portal, then those are buyers that have been vetted by someone in our network, either the USDA office overseas or one of our consultants. Like the Connects website was built so that it's not visible to just everybody who has Wi-Fi. It is kind of an invite only thing so that we are making sure that only like vetted foreign buyers are connecting you through Connects.
But when it
If
comes,
they're
so when it
con-
comes to me, when it comes to me, it will have like Connects 365, like a
yes.
label on. Okay, that's good
Yeah.
to know. All
Yeah,
right.
yeah. So you'll know if it's coming through Connects. If it's just coming through your website, then I would just, exercise caution because that could be, could absolutely be a legitimate foreign buyer, but it could also be someone who is, not as legitimate. So you may want to do more homework on those buyers.
Okay. Thank you.
And I see a question
Yeah.
in the chat. Ahmed is saying, how can we best utilize the free trade agreement in countries like Jordan? We specialize in animal feed. And I would say, besides going through the steps and definitely taking the full course, where we teach you how to actually qualify under a free trade agreement, the steps and that kind of stuff. But that will be a great question for the helpline.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So SUSA has a helpline, and if you connect with Danielle right after, she will take you there. I mean, you can. It's on the website though.
It
Um,
is. I'm
and
gonna,
you're gonna share. Oh, let me stop
yeah.
sharing.
No, no, no. That's,
Oh,
I'll
oh,
share
you're
my,
gonna put a link in there.
I'll share my screen real quick just so everybody knows where to go. So if you're on the SESTA homepage, the export helpline here, and you can just click ask the expert for questions that are very specific, like this one, how to access the free
Yeah,
trade agreement in Jordan. The
yeah,
helpline,
for feed.
yeah,
So
for feed.
very
Yes,
specific.
exactly. Really specific. the Export Helpline is a great resource. We have a different consultant. Her name is also Victoria, so a little confusing. And she answers the Export Helpline. You'll get an answer within 48 hours, and she'll help you not just identify the answer, but she'll show you how she got there, so that you're also, kind of learning these steps along the way. So the export helpline, specific questions. The export readiness training is if you're more like, gosh, I need to, to really learn the full process. But yeah, for those specific questions, please tap into the helpline that's there for.
Yeah, and because that's so specific. So without actually looking at the trade agreement and seeing if you qualify, all those steps, right, and how you might benefit and whether feed is included, all those steps, Victoria, the other Victoria, will be able to kind of do for you, and it's a lot more customized. Because I would hate to just kind of off the cuff because it's so specific, right? Just to say, oh, because once again, I'd say, it's always very country specific and product specific. So, but yes, that's open to any SESTA member. Is that right, Danielle?
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So, that would definitely be the best bet.
Yes.
But yeah, if anyone has questions like that, please use that
for sure. And while I'm sharing my screen on our website, I am going to take everybody to the our events page. If you go to Export Education, this is where, this webinar today is housed, but we also have several other webinars coming up that we just have been posting this week. We have one coming up on Malaysia, April 3rd, and another one on the Kenya market on April 10th. So please take a look at those if you're interested in Southeast Asia or Africa. And then this is also where you'll find export readiness training, the full training that's up on our website. So it's always going to be under the Export Education tab on the events page. I don't see any other questions coming in. So thank you, Victoria. As always, a wealth of information. And we look forward to everybody who wants to learn more. Please reach out or sign up for the Export Readiness Training, and see you there.
Perfect.
All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everybody.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.